Welcome to Perfect Takes this afternoon on a fine Tuesday, if you will. Weather's been heating up here in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined by my dear friend and co host, Jacob LaQuire. Jacob, how's your day been so far?
It's pretty good. You said it's been heating up, but today and yesterday, it's kind of cold. I like it. I like the cold weather. So the beer of the week doesn't fit because we're preparing for like a hot day. It's mango chronic IPA, more tropical stuff like that. Summer's coming and stuff like that, but it's cold today. So it doesn't fit today, but it's still a good beer and ready to get into today's episode.
Yeah, we have this like tropical thing going on with beers. It's like mango this or from the islands, like you have notes of other tropical
It's like
fruits.
citrus, yeah.
Yeah, and we do a bunch of that. So we're the Tropical IPA podcast guys, and we're gonna jump right into kind of what happened with the Panthers since we got off air last week, and it's been a ride. Like free agency was not a good start for us. We watched a lot of star players either just leave in free agency or we trade Brian Burns, and it just seems like a team that was devoid of talent already lost so much more. And not that you should find your answers in free agency, but what we did after that was great. You mentioned it in your perfect take last week. We signed Josie Jewell from Denver. I think he fits our linebacking core a lot better, understands what Evero is going to ask of him in that scheme and that system. And then we actually had another trade go down, and I think, honest to goodness, and this is a check mark for Dan Morgan, won a trade with the Pittsburgh Steelers. You want to get into kind of the details, how we took a cut candidate and turned that into a player who's a phenomenal separator.
Yeah, it's weird, right? Like this is the first time I feel like the Panthers have won a trade in quite a while, at least on paper. We traded Dante Jackson and a sixth round pick for Deontay Johnson, the receiver from Pittsburgh. Phenomenal separator, something that this offense lacked and sorely needed last year. We got him and a seventh round pick, which that's basically whatever. I think it's pick 240. It's always nice to have extra darts to throw. But that's not the meaningful part of the trade. It's Deontay Johnson. He has one more year on his contract, but I believe his contract was barely more than what Dante Jackson's was. And to be able to, I think, get a better player than Dante is, and get a player that we sorely needed because last year it was Thielen and everybody else, and even Thielen was he was a nice security blanket, but he wasn't like a burner. He wasn't like tearing up corners ankles or anything. To have a guy that's able to do all of that it's just phenomenal for the development of Bryce Young because we went into this offseason thinking, all right, at pick 33 and now 39, we need to double up on receiver. We need to sign Mike Evans, Calvin Ridley. We need all the help we can get. Obviously, Mike Evans isn't there. He re-signs with Tampa Bay. Calvin Ridley, who we'll talk about later, gets an enormous bag from a division rival, and all the top end receiver candidates aren't there. But we trade for a guy that I don't think anybody thought was available except maybe NFL people. And I think it's going to work out well. And then I believe the same day, or maybe it was the next day, we ended up signing somebody every day last week and yesterday. So every weekday that free agency has been a thing this year. We've signed somebody. We signed Dane Jackson from the Buffalo Bills, who he's been a good third corner for them over the past couple of years, and we got him for 8.5 million over 2 years, which is even if Dante is better, I think having a corner at 4 million a year is a much better deal than having to cut a guy and take on his dead cap.
Well, it's exactly like you said, Jordan Fuller. Not, I'm jumping ahead. Dame Jackson, we have at, like you said, 8.5 mil over 2 years, and we also signed Jordan Fuller for about 5 million over 1 year. And when you look at Dante Jackson's cap hit of being kind of north of, I think it was actually like 15 mil, but
Hmm.
with kind of trading him and moving him off the books, I think we got about 10 mil. And so you get two players for the price of one in that instance. And I think that's a lot better. Not saying that they're going to be able to replace all of his production or be a guy that you can put out on an X or a Y receiver on the outside. But it provides you more stability, more depth, because if injuries happen, now you have more bodies to throw at the issue, the problem. And I want to go back to the point that you were making about wide receivers is that the market dried up so fast, and that's what makes the wide receiver position one of the premium positions. So when you hear kind of all this stuff about premium, non-premium positions around the draft, in free agency, one of the biggest indicators is, does that position, the top of those positions, like the best of the best, do they hit free agency? And you see interior offensive line, you see running backs, you see tight ends, you see these non premium positions hit the open market a lot more frequently than you see guys that play wide receiver, edge, quarterback, you name it. And so for us to be able to lock in a guy that is seventh in yards per route run against man coverage last year, he was 12th in ESPN's open metric score with a score of 78. And that kind of guy, the fit with Bryce, who had very few separators last year, that's huge. That gives Bryce a security blanket to know, okay, if I turn and look at Deontay Johnson, he's going to be open. That's such a relief for a young quarterback, and that's exactly what we needed to add with Bryce Young. And like you said, we added a whole bunch of people over the slew of last week. We addressed the defensive end position or outside linebacker with signing DJ Wonham and Clayveon Chasen. Again, two guys for a much smaller price tag compared to paying Brian Burns. Will they necessarily replace Brian Burns? No. But in the aggregate, when you have the bodies, when you can have a rotation, I feel a lot more comfortable about our D line this week than I did last week.
Right, and these are two younger players as well with connections to the Carolina Panthers. Chason was drafted when our defensive line coach Todd Wash was in Jacksonville, so he's familiar there. DJ Wanham played football at South Carolina, so he knows the area. And then with those two, and I still think it should be addressed more, we had Chase Young come in for a visit last week. Obviously, he signed with New Orleans last night, but we also had Jadeveon Clowney come in, another guy who played his college ball at South Carolina, and I'm hopeful that we can sign him because that would be excellent to pair a veteran who had a really good year last year with Baltimore with some of the younger guys and help teach them, especially if we end up drafting a guy at the edge spot. But Jadeveon Clowney is known to take his time in free agency, which kind of isn't ideal when you're trying to build your team. He's been known to like wait till after training camp or sign later in the year, but hopefully we're able to lock him up. Shaq Thompson did change his number from 7 to back to 54, which is what he used to be. And guess who wore number 7 in college? Jadeveon
Well,
Clowney. So
two guys that have had recent visits with Carolina, Clowney and Mike Williams, and both
yeah, that's right.
played ball at South Carolina. So there's definitely some indication that we're going to bring in one of those guys. Clowney, I think it's kind of like what Allen Iverson said, like practice. We're talking about practice. Like I think Clowney just realizes like he's played enough in the NFL. He's like, you know what I'm about, you know my game, you know what I bring to the table. Hit me up when you guys are done practicing and getting on the field. So I think that's where he's at right now in his career and has been for probably the last half decade. And I would love to have Clowney to our rotation. I think if he's there, we had another guy. We have Barno and DJ Johnson as guys we've drafted in recent years. That's a rotation that's obviously not stellar, but I don't think it's bottom of the league anymore as it was last week.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, last week definitely. Last year was even bad too, even with Burns. But hopefully we can sign Clowney and get some leeway back on that defensive line. We did add Ashawn Robinson last week, I think during the recording as well. So hopefully we get a few more defensive line reinforcements. You alluded to Mike Williams visiting. I think his visit is today. And Michael Gallup, the former Cowboy, is also visiting at some point this week. So we're getting receiver visits, so obviously that's still a position that we want to address. And I agree with that there. I don't think Deontay Johnson is enough, considering this was probably the worst or second worst receiver core in the league last year. Maybe the Patriots was worse, but I still think we need another receiver. And even if we end up getting a guy like Mike Williams, who would be huge, I still think we need to draft one early as well with the two second round picks that we have. The last signing that we made was it's Yash Nyman. I looked up how to pronounce it just before we started recording. He was kind of a swing tackle for the Packers for quite a few years. When Bakhtiari was out, he would play for him there. So I like that signing because that's more offensive line depth, right? We saw a position that was just horrible last year with the offensive line, and we immediately addressed it with the two guards, getting this guy. Corbett's going to move over to center. So really happy with a lot of the stuff we've done so far in free agency. It feels good that they have a plan, right? Like they're not just signing people; they have like an actual plan for once.
Yeah, no, it feels like everything is very systematic. We're bringing in guys that fit our scheme, fit the brand of football that we want to play. I love that. There's a rush, or not a rush. I would say an urgency within this first wave of free agency of addressing those non-premium positions that we have holes at: linebacker, safety, corner. Obviously, offensive tackle, which Yash plays, did a phenomenal job filling in for Bakhtiari, and I believe he even played several snaps at right tackle. Actually, started against the Cowboys 2 years ago when Rodgers had a heck of a game throwing. I think it was like 3 touchdowns to Christian Watson. Huge stellar fantasy
I
game for
remember
him
that
that week.
game. Yeah.
And all you see is him locking up Parsons, him locking up Demarcus Lawrence, being solid in the run game. And having a guy like that, if Moton or Icky goes down, is so huge because Corbett as a guard, Braden Christensen as a guard weren't bad guards. They had a great 2022 season, but they both go down with injuries in 2023, and their backups just aren't capable. And so just having the foresight of going, we don't know what's going to happen, but to make sure that we have that depth is so key. And I think that's huge. And it's going to pay dividends if something were to go down that wasn't in our favor, so to say. And speaking of the offensive line, moving in from kind of the Panthers section, kind of Panthers recap of where we're seeing this franchise go, and ending kind of in the trenches, talking about the defensive line, offensive line. There was a legendary, and I want to use the word legendary because he deserves it, legendary defensive player to retire this past week. He will be a first ballot Hall of Fame. This guy racked up over the course of a 10-year career, 8-time first team All Pro. He was Defensive Rookie of the Year, 3-time Defensive Player of the Year, racked up 111 sacks. Dude was stellar. He had a Super Bowl ring with the Rams. And if you guys haven't picked up on who I'm talking about, it's Aaron Donald. And this guy is one of the best defensive players of our generation. Will go down as one of the best all time. And I just want to know if you have any thoughts before we kind of get into the discussion of where he ranks all time, of who you thought of him as a player during his time in the NFL.
Well, you talked about our offensive line getting better through the signings and stuff like that. Every offensive line in the league just got a lot better with Aaron Donald not having to go up against them and terrorize them every week. It's funny when he announced his retirement officially. You see a bunch of tweets about quarterbacks just being scared for their lives when they see him on the field, and he was really that kind of disruptive force. I don't know if we've ever really seen somebody equal to that along the defensive line, at least since I've been watching football the past 15 to 20 or so years. He's just clearly one of the most dominant players that I've ever seen at his position for sure. He's the best defensive tackle I've ever watched. Just looking at his accolades, defensive player of the year 3 times in his career out of 10 years, which is crazy.
Yep.
I believe it was 3 in 4 years. I don't think he got three in a row. Um,
Yeah, it was 3 and 4.
yeah, he was an 8-time first team All Pro. The 2 years he didn't get it, he was a rookie where he won Defensive Rookie of the Year. The other year he was hurt. So every
Yep.
year that he was fully healthy, first team All Pro, like no questions asked. He got close to setting the sack record that one year. I think he finished with 20 and a half, which is absolutely absurd from a guy who does his rushing from the interior. And he's just been a force like the entire time he's been in the league. It seems like he was pondering retirement, especially after their Super Bowl win a couple years ago, but ended up coming back. Was still dominant. Got first team All Pro again this year. But it's a sad day to see for sure for football fans, but for I'm sure NFC West fans, it's a happy day because now you don't have to have Kyler getting crushed by him. You don't have to have the Seahawks putting 4 offensive linemen on him, and you don't have to have Shanahan like wasting his prized fullback and tight end helping chip Aaron Donald all game. But as far as he ranks all time, for me, and this is coming from a guy whose favorite player from a long time was Ray Lewis. I think he's the best defensive player I've ever seen. Now, obviously, I never watched Reggie White, Lawrence Taylor, guys like that, but to me, Aaron Donald's been in a class of his own since I've been watching football.
I think that's a fair take to say best of our generation. There are people that I would argue for that position, but what I want people to realize when they make claims that he's the greatest of all time, that there's an element of, I believe, recency bias there. And I just want to kind of bring up the 2 or 3 guys that I think should definitely be above him when we have these conversations all time. One that's going to be Reggie White. This guy was a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, 8-time first team All Pro, racked up 198 sacks, second only to Bruce Smith, who played in the same era. racked up 231 approximate value from PFR, which is seventh all time. And that's including guys like Tom Brady, your Peyton Mannings, like all the positions, the best of the best, the Jerry Rices, you name it. He ranks seventh all time. And that is like when you turn on the highlight tape with Reggie White, when you look at just his raw stat numbers, this guy was an absolute dominant force that could not be stopped week in and week out. Like he was throwing offensive linemen, 300-pound dudes with one arm. And that was just his signature move. Like, and it was insane to watch. And then the other guy is Lawrence Taylor. This guy had a MVP in his career, won 2 Super Bowls with the Giants with Bill Parcells, Bill Belichick, and had 3 Defensive Player of the Year awards as well. He was also Defensive Rookie of the Year, was 8-time first team All Pro, just like Aaron Donald and Reggie White, racked up 142 sacks, so 30 more sacks than Aaron Donald, and then had 192 approximate value, which ranks 19th all time. Now, I didn't talk about Aaron Donald's approximate value earlier, but it was 153, which ranks 60th all time. And the comp I want to make at this point is I believe Aaron Donald is the Barry Sanders of his position. He is going to be in a lot of people's Mount Rushmore of defensive linemen. I don't think he's the best defensive lineman, and I don't think he's the best defensive player all time. And so that's where my hesitation is. I think guys like Ray Lewis was a force to be reckoned with in our own era. We saw very, very dominant corner play. I don't know if it was as long or as great as Aaron Donald's stretch with guys like Darrelle Revis. And then we've seen guys within our own era of like a J.J. Watt playing the defensive line who racked up 3 Defensive Player of the Year awards within a 4-year span, who went over 20 sacks 2 times in his career, which I think has never been done outside of what he did. And if he didn't have any back injuries, I think J.J. Watt and Aaron Donald would be this generation's Reggie White and Bruce Smith. So that's my take on it. That's my spin on it. I think he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. Nothing against him. I wouldn't put him as the best of all time.
I like a lot of what you're saying. My refute to that would be the guys that you listed off: Reggie White, Lawrence Taylor, even J.J. Watt. All of these guys collected their accolades and their numbers over more than a decade. Aaron Donald has only played for 10 years, and he's doing all these things. Like he has 8-time All Pro in 10 years, and the 2 times he doesn't have it, rookie and hurt. 3 Defensive Player awards in 10 years, like of a career. Whereas Watt played 12 years. Granted, he was injured for a time.
But those
Uh,
3 Defensive Player of the Year awards came very early on in his career. That's what I'm saying. Like if JJ Watt doesn't have the back injuries, I think he goes toe to toe with these conversations with Aaron Donald. That's what derailed his career.
Maybe, but he also started his career without Aaron Donald in the league. That's
He
something to think
did
about
back in
as well.
2011. Yeah, but
Mhm.
he won. And let's remember this. We talked about Lawrence Taylor winning an MVP. Alan Page did the same back in the day with the Minnesota Vikings. JJ Watt was runner up to Aaron Rodgers back in 2012 when he was catching touchdown passes as like a tight end position and then just wrecking havoc as a defensive lineman. And his tackle for loss numbers are insane. That's one thing that's not talked about Aaron Donald's game enough, and he improved as his career went on, was his ability in the run game. Because of how fast he could just cut up field, a lot of times offenses could use that to their advantage and run almost right at Aaron Donald, and he'd be out of the play before it even began. And that sometimes was an issue.
Well, I think it's easier to take an interior guy out than it is an edge guy because one out of every two interior guys is likely to be doubled every play.
Yeah.
But yeah, not to take away from J.J. Watt, it was the 2014 season where he finished runner-up to Aaron Donald
Oh, that's right.
and MVP. But then Reggie White, 15 seasons, 16 if you count the year in between the last Green Bay and the Carolina stint. 16 or 15 seasons in the league, and Lawrence Taylor 13 seasons in the league. So I think if we extrapolated Donald's career over 13 to 15 years, however many years you want to put it. I think counting stats like sacks and approximate value and stuff like that would shoot way up. And I'm certain he would have more first team All Pros. Maybe even if he repeats his performances, he could have another Defensive Player of the Year. But that's probably less likely. But suffice to say, he's definitely one of the greatest defensive players and players of all time, for that matter. It's just I think in our generation, he's probably the best.
Yeah. No, and the only reason I wanted to have this segment is I think a lot of people were jumping the gun trying to crown him as the best all time. The best all time will always be Tom Brady. the longevity of his career, the
Yeah.
accomplishments he had. And then when you go to other positions, there are people that had excellence throughout their entire career, like Jerry Rice. And then if you're talking about people that just completely dominated a position, the Randy Mosses of the position. So, and that's exactly kind of the boat that I would put Aaron Donald is like the Randy Moss. Like he completely transformed how we view interior defensive linemen, how we view three techs, and he's going to change the game. Like he did change the game, and that's nothing short but praise warranted from him. Moving on, out of this Aaron Donald segment, we're kind of going to talk about, we talked about with the Panthers, kind of our free agency signings. We're going to be going over trades and signings across the NFL. And there were a lot of quarterback trades over this past week. So last week before we got on, the Jacksonville Jaguars traded a sixth for Mac Jones in his final year of his rookie deal. And then we saw three more quarterbacks on their rookie contracts get traded for pretty much the equivalent of late round picks. Is there one that particularly interests you out of those three?
Well, the one that I hated, to be quite frank, was Desmond Ritter for Rondale Moore straight up. I don't know why the Cardinals would do that because why would you give the Falcons like a decent weapon in Rondale Moore for Ritter? Ritter's not good. I guess he's going to be the backup to Kyler because Kyler is. I'm a big Kyler Murray fan. I think he's a bit underrated. I think he's leagues above what Desmond Ritter is. So I don't really understand that one much, but I think the other two were interesting to say the least. Like I like the Sam Howell one because Gino's not getting any younger, and Sam Howell, while he wasn't a good starter, he showed some stuff, I think. And to have a backup like that moving forward, especially now that Drew Lock is in, it's the Giants, right? Drew Lock went to the Giants. I think that's a good trade there. And then the other one, that's kind of the crazy one, right? Trading
Well, that's the
away.
thing. You mentioned Desmond Ritter and Drew Lock's trade, which weren't the three I was even talking about. So yeah, get into the one of the three that we were I was thinking of at the top of my head.
Yeah, the big one. I think it's they're kind of related, but to start the big one, Kenny Pickett to the Eagles, and it was what are the exact picks here? So Philly sends 98 and two future sevenths, and Pittsburgh gets back 120. Is that
No, 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 no. So
or
Philadelphia is sending 98 and two future sevens, and they get 120 back.
okay, and they get Philly gets Kenny Pickett back as well.
Yes.
That one kind of weird how that one all went down. Uh, like on Twitter and stuff, it seems like they were promised a competition for the QB spot, but then I guess Pickett didn't think it was going to be a competition, so asked for a trade, and then they they replaced Pickett like what 3 or 4 days later with
Yeah.
the to me the big trade. I think the probably the best quarterback out of all the ones that have been traded so far. Justin Fields finally finds a home after his market had dried up. He goes to Pittsburgh for what starts as a future six, but could go up to a four if he plays. I think it's greater than half of the offensive snaps. So the one I like the most is probably that one for Pittsburgh because right now I think that I personally think Fields is probably better than Russ. I'm just super down on Russ, but I like the security they get there. Maybe they feel like they can like groom and train Fields to be better than he was in Chicago. I think there's more infrastructure in the organization in Pittsburgh for sure because the that organization's been together for longer than Chicago's has. And Chicago's outside of this year was just kind of a hellscape for offensive players. But that's the most interesting one to me. Interested to see if they're gonna hold Fields back so they don't have to send that fourth round pick, or if they're gonna throw him in when Russ inevitably underwhelms.
The interesting thing is with Russ and Fields is they both take a lot of bad sacks.
Hmm.
And that like it's the Steelers' offensive line isn't great to begin with, and then they ship out Deontay Johnson. They have George Pickens now. You got to think that they're going wide receiver, offensive line in the draft, maybe even addressing some of that in free agency. If you don't help your quarterback, the same excuses Fields got in Chicago with not having people around him, he's going to get in Pittsburgh because that's the case right now with that offense. And then you have Arthur Smith in that offense. So you're going to see some play action. You're going to see some more like deep bombs. And hopefully it goes back to more the Tennessee Titans offense when they had Derrick Henry. And in this case, the Steelers have Najee Harris and Jalen Warren and kind of that 1-2 punch. If you lean more into the run game and just open it up and allow Russ and Fields to just throw to like kind of that first, second read, I think they might be successful. You might have an offense that's able to move the ball. I'm just worried they're going to get too cute with things and I get to a point where the Arthur Smith offense that we saw last year in Atlanta, and that would be scary. I think that would kind of pretty much spell the end of Russell Wilson's career. And then it would really put the nail in the coffin for Justin Fields as a guy coming out of college. A lot of people had high hopes for being the 11th overall pick in the, what was it, the 2021 draft when
21. Yeah.
yeah, when five quarterbacks got. So we'll see what happens. It's just that is a very precarious situation that I think we have to monitor. And speaking of guys that take bad sack problems, the other guy that did get traded was Sam Howell. And there are some people that would have you believe he is a starting quarterback in this NFL. I just don't see it. I think the trade compensation he got is proof that people around the league think he's an average NFL quarterback. He's got a great arm. He can produce through the air, but he takes a lot of bad sacks and a lot of bad negative plays, and that racks up more often than not. And this is where it's one of those things when we look to the draft, which quarterbacks can eliminate that the most. And out of the options that are available this year, Michael Penix is honestly the best at avoiding sacks. So that's something to keep an eye for. We talked about in the quarterback episode. He has an injury history, so that's the big knock on him. But Michael Penix's ability to not take those negative plays is such a huge plus for him. But it's not talked about enough because that's not what's flashy or catches the viewer or audience's eye.
Yeah, I kind of like the Howell trade just because, like I talked about, they lose their backup in Drew Lock, and like, I don't think he's like the worst QB. I think there's something there, and I think they'll be able to get stuff out of him, especially with Geno getting older. But there are a couple other non QB trade, not QB yet kind of trades that happened. Chicago traded a fourth round pick for Keenan Allen, so the Chargers got rid of both of their big cap hit receivers. Obviously, they cut Mike Williams, and now Keenan Allen is a Chicago Bear. So presumably, for Caleb Williams, he's going to have Keenan Allen, DJ Moore. Who they just signed another tight end, Gerald Everett,
Yep.
Cole Kmet, and then that number 9 pick can be a receiver maybe or something like that. So
Or maybe they go Brock Bowers if he's there. I
there,
would not be surprised Shane Waldron kind of being on board with getting a lot of bodies in that tight end room. He ran a lot of 12 and 13 out in Seattle. Now, I think they have bigger needs. And I think if Odunze is available and Bowers are available, you take Odunze the pair with those wide receivers because at that point, you bring in Caleb Williams, you have Rome Odunze, you have DJ Moore, you have Keenan Allen. That's
yeah.
locked and loaded.
It's I think for sure it's the best scenario a number 1 pick QB has walked into maybe ever. Um
Yeah,
in terms of the
by
offensive
far.
infrastructure, and you're a big Shane Waldron fan too, so like the play calling and stuff as well. But there was another trade that happened last week as well. And I said not for a QB yet because the idea is Minnesota is going to trade up for a QB. And they started this process kind of like the Eagles did back in 2016 before trading up for Wentz. They traded their second rounder this year, a late round pick, their second
And a
rounder next
future
year.
second. Yep.
Yeah, for the Houston Texans first round pick, which came to Houston from Cleveland. So it's pick 23. Minnesota has 11 and 23 now, and the thought has to be that they're going to try to get to maybe 3, 4, or 5 to get in front of the Giants to take a QB, one of the top 3 or 4 QBs, whether it's Drake May, Jaden Daniels, or JJ McCarthy. I think is pretty clear the QB4 in the at least in the media's eyes. So maybe for one of them, I guess I like the move because number one, good O line last year, right? Number two, best receiver in the league in Jefferson and best rookie receiver in the league last year in Jordan Addison. Number three, T.J. Hawkinson is good there as well. And they also have Kevin O'Connell, who I believe is a very good play caller. So I like gearing up to get a QB and having offensive infrastructure in place. It's not what Carolina did. So I kind of like this. The only thing for me is, are they going to get to 3 or are they going to get to 5? I don't think Arizona's trading number 4, nor should they. They should just take Marvin Harrison Jr. and be happy with it. But are they
Yep.
gonna get Drake May, Jaden Daniels, or are they gonna get JJ McCarthy? That's my only hang up with it.
If Drake May is there at 3, and I'm the Patriots, like personally, if I'm the Patriots, I would take him and just build around him. But I
Mhm.
think there's an allure that maybe okay, you move back to 11, you 23, maybe you get an additional pick somewhere else from the
Like next
Vikings.
year's first or something, yeah.
Exactly. And JJ McCarthy falls to 11, which I think is definitely in the realm of possibilities. And then you grab one of the top end tackle prospects because this is a deep tackle class, and there's a lot of good players at the top of it. You can start rebuilding in New England that way, and they aren't not accustomed to a Michigan quarterback starting. I mean, Tom Brady got his start. Granted, he was a 6th round pick, but JJ McCarthy he does a lot of things right, and he's played in a run heavy offense, which I think will be featured in New England. They brought in Alex Van Pelt from Cleveland, and they were kind of run oriented the past couple years under Kevin Stefanski. So I think that lends itself to considering that the Patriots would be kind of in a move for that. If Jaden Daniels is at 3, I think seeing someone that electric behind a great offensive line, like you said in Minnesota, all homegrown, and then the weapons he would have, it would be like him coming from LSU to Minnesota and it being boom, boom. And I think that would work too. So I think Minnesota is in a win-win position if they try to go up to 3. It's just a matter if New England's okay moving on from one of the quarterback prospects that are going to be there.
Yeah, I personally wouldn't. My philosophy is you're in your mind, you should think that we're not gonna be bad enough to pick this high again and get a QB like this.
Exactly.
So I'm not quite sure that New England is gonna be privy to moving back. I do think the Chargers at 5 are a likely trade back spot because they have their guy. Herbert's the guy there, right? So especially with
But
Harbaugh
like you
coming in
said,
starting
when,
over, but like to get two
when
first round picks in a class where Odunze might get to 11, or you could get Adonai Mitchell or Brian Thomas at 23, or like a tackle, or Minnesota needs defense too. They could take Terry and Arnold at or excuse me, the Chargers need defense as well. They could take like an edge rusher at 11, like Verse or something like that. I think it would behoove them a lot more trading back than it would the Patriots. Minnesota's trading up because the Giants, if one of the 4 QBs makes it to them, I think they're going to take it because Daniel Jones is not good. Let's
he
be
isn't.
very clear. And they spent a ton of money on him. Didn't work. They spent that to keep Saquon. Saquon's gone. Bad, like it's just a bad situation there. So I think they want to start over. So it's just the question of are they going to trade up to 5 or 3? If I'm the Patriots, I'm sticking to my guns, picking 3. So I think that 5 spot is really good, especially for a new regime coming in, probably wanting to change some of the structure around for the team. So I really think the Chargers are the team to look at to move back.
Yeah, no, I've heard a lot of about that. It's more just when there's a prospect like Malik Neighbors
Hmm.
probably going to be there at 5, and like we talked about earlier, Mike Williams and Keenan Allen are no longer Chargers. To have a guy like that in a very barren wide receiver room, I think would be huge. But trading back, like you said, maybe a Dunze's there. If it's not, you go like Verse out of FSU, and then at 23, you're going Adonai Mitchell or Brian Thomas. You can rebuild that way. And this is a deep wide receiver class, so you can take multiple shots at it that way. So
You're not a fan of Quentin Johnston. You said the receiver room's empty.
I mean, so I took it was after that trade I took a screenshot of the our lads wide receiving room that Greg Roman had the last year he was in with Baltimore. So that was back in 2022, and the starting 3 wide receivers were Rashad Bateman, a 1st round pick, Devin Duvernay, a 3rd round pick, and James Proche,
Crochet,
um,
yeah.
Proche, and he was a 6th round pick. So Josh Palmer, I think he's kind of that like day 2 kind of pick was he's a solid wide receiver. He's a solid number 3. Quentin Johnston, I think, has the ability to up his game if he can just hold on to the ball. But it's adding a true number 1. And I think if they do that, that changes a lot of what they're able to do on offense. I think they're going to lean into the run game a lot more. I think they're kind of like the West Coast Baltimore Ravens. I mean, you bring in Greg Roman, Bradley Bozeman, Hayden Hurst, and Gus Edwards. They're going to be determined to run the ball and take a lot more off Justin Herbert's shoulder this fall.
Hear me out here. The Chargers trade back with the The Vikings, they get 11 and 23 and whatever else. At 11, Brock Bowers, and then 23, Adonai Mitchell. I think that would be
That would be
excellent
insane.
for
That
the
would be
Chargers.
disgusting. Like
And
that.
that's the kind of thing they need to be thinking about, right? Because if Herbert's the guy, and he is, you need to build around him. They did a bad job of doing that in the first. Well, they tried to do it, but they spent a lot of money and it just didn't work out. Staley obviously didn't. Once he became the head coach, didn't have the influence, or like not the influence, but he was a great defensive coordinator, but it didn't translate when he was the head coach, even when they spent all the money on defense. So hopefully they just reset it and get everything right this time. That's why I kind of want them to be the ones to trade back, but we'll see there. There were a couple big signings that happened this week, though.
Talking
Usually
about wide
all,
receiver. Yeah,
yeah,
I mean this
yeah,
is this is a good segue.
yeah, usually all the big signings are in the tampering period, or whatever it's called, the negotiating period. But one of the signings in particular was after, and it was because when this team traded for the guy, the stipulation on the pick was if he signed in the negotiating period, it's a second rounder you got to send. But if he signed after, it's a third rounder. And so the Jags waited until Wednesday, I believe at 4 p.m. is when free agency technically started. They were waiting all this time to re-sign Calvin Ridley, but the Titans swooped in at the 11th hour, and they signed Calvin Ridley to a monster deal, $90 million over 4 years. I think it's like 52, something like that, is guaranteed. 51, 52 million, which is a huge amount of money. And you wrote it here, and I think everybody's thinking it. If this offense were around in 2020, it'd be pretty good, right? DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley, but it's
Hmm.
not. Those guys are 4 or 5 years older than it would be in 2020. Calvin Ridley's already an older receiver. He's the same
But
age
he's
as Amari Cooper.
but he feels 25, man. But he feels
I,
25.
I guess that's what he said to the Titans owners to get him to give him that deal. But that's just a bizarre amount of money to me. But at least they're adding weapons of some effective caliber around Will Levis, who presumably is going to be their QB at least the next year or so, like while they see what he's got. So I like the signing in that matter. I just don't like how much they gave him.
Yeah. Uh, it's it's one of those. I guess the Titans building philosophy, and they've gone after older wide receivers. They traded a second for an aging Julio Jones
That's true.
on a bad contract. They obviously signed DeAndre Hopkins last year. They signed Calvin Ridley. They did draft Peter Skoronski last year. And it looks like they are one of the favorites to grab Joe Alt, or one of the top tackle prospects. And we talked about tackles last week. And you start building the offensive line that way, and you give them some options on the outside. And Traylon Burks now is the third option. And he was drafted a couple years ago after they traded A.J. Brown. They used the first round pick on him. You get him more in the slot, maybe all of a sudden this passing offense kind of comes alive, especially when you have Tajay Spears and now Tony Pollard coming out of the backfield. I think it definitely elevates the offense to where you can now fairly evaluate Will Levis and where he's at. But like you said, from a team building perspective, this is a lot of money to hand out to an older, aging wide receiver.
Yeah, for sure. The other two big receiver deals are not big deals, but bigger names, I think. Hollywood Brown to Kansas City. I think a lot of people saw that one coming. They needed to replenish their receiver room, and they got a pretty fair deal, I think. I think the base value is 7 million with up to 11 in incentives. And I saw the incentives today. They're pretty reachable. Like the top end echelon of each one has 1,000 yards, and I think it was 7 touchdowns. If you're in a Patrick Mahomes offense, especially with Travis Kelsey getting older, you're probably going to hit those if you're the number one option. So I like that deal for them. Curtis Samuel also signed with the Buffalo Bills. I think it was a
He
30
did.
over 3 deal. I like that one too. He's always been underrated, I think, even going back to his time in Carolina with like
Joe
Kyle Allen
Brady.
and Bridgewater. Yeah, and Joe Brady was there, who's now the offensive coordinator for the Bills. He got promoted midseason. So I like that one. Josh Allen got another weapon. But then there were a couple defensive line guys as well that got paid over the last couple of days.
Yeah, Daniil Hunter pretty much got a fully guaranteed 2-year deal with the Texans as they're trying to maximize their championship window, and I think that's a perfect guy to put next to Will Anderson. I mean, that's going to wreak havoc, get after the quarterback. I really like that signing. They were trying to go after a couple other big names that kind of just bolster the roster and help put them over the edge to where what we saw in Joe Burrow's second year with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins making a Super Bowl run to try to be a contender in the AFC against the Kansas City Chiefs. they're loading up and doing that. And then Detroit, I spoke too soon last week. I wasn't too sold on the defensive line. I expected maybe a little regression this year, especially with kind of Green Bay and Chicago making moves and Minnesota moving up for their quarterback. But they got DJ Reader, who is a good space eater, great in the run game. They also brought in a couple edge rushers that we talked about last week that I think will fit Brian Flores' system and scheme a lot better. So really excited about just I'm off on a tangent with Minnesota because that's not who signed DJ Reader. When the Lions signed him, you pair him with McNeil, who's a gap shooter, and then you have Aiden Hutchinson on the outside. You draft another guy in this draft class. Detroit's looking really good. And I'm excited to see kind of what they do moving forward. They bolster the back end. I think Detroit is still in the running to kind of control the NFC North. This is a team to be reckoned with. They didn't lose any of their coordinators, and I don't know if they're going to really skip a step this next fall.
I think the NFC North, and this is kind of jumping ahead. We'll probably, when we talk about like divisions in the offseason, it'll probably be more appropriate then. I think the NFC North is going to be probably the strongest division in football this year. I think the Bears are going to be a lot better. I think the Packers have something to prove as well. So that's going to be interesting. The other big one is I wrote down Buffalo and crossed it off because I believe it was Diana Rossini that had a or no, it was Justina Anderson, excuse me, had a tweet that said Eric Armstead to the Bills. They're working out the deal, and then it got deleted instantly. And then I think it was Schefter that said Eric Armstead, the former 49er, is going to Jacksonville. He's reunited with Trent Baalke, who drafted him when he was the Niners GM. And I like the signing a lot because we talked about how the defense needs to keep up last year, and they just need to be good, right? And the offense will take care of it. But it was really the opposite, right? The offense was struggling behind the defense, and I think continuing to bolster the defense, especially with you have Josh Allen, the edge rusher, on the tag. You have number one pick Trayvon Wallace or Trayvon Walker, excuse me, continuing to grow. I like the signing there. Hopefully, the Jags are able to turn it around because it looks like all the teams in the division might lap them soon.
Yeah, no, this was a solid signing by Jacksonville. What I like about the pairing with Ryan Nielsen is that he had a lot of guys that could stop the run. That maybe they don't get after the quarterback with just four guys, but they aren't worried about sending pressure or loading the box to stop the run. And that allows you to drop 7, 8 guys in coverage. And I think Ryan Nielsen's okay with kind of the guys that he has in Jacksonville to be able to do that when you have Trayvon Walker, you have Eric Armstead, you have Josh Allen, you have these three guys that are just solid on the defensive line, and you can trust them to do what they're going to do. And then it just frees up just your ability to kind of play coverage and take away options from the offense. So I thought that was a great signing by Jacksonville as they're trying to keep up with the Texans. Obviously, like you talked about, the Titans are loading up. The Colts look really, really good under Shane Steichen. So Sheldon Rankins, he went to Cincinnati. Guy from the Houston Texans. They may get Tier Tart, who's kind of the space eater down in Houston, and they'll just kind of be the Cincinnati Texans, I guess, in terms of their interior defensive line. They prioritize kind of the back end more this offseason with bringing back Von Bell and trying to solidify kind of the miscommunication issues, which allowed to, I think it was the highest explosive rate they allowed in the NFL last year. So Lou Anarumo is trying to get that squad back on track. And then the Saints, they signed Chase Young to a 1-year deal. I think it's $13 million. This was something that cap experts kind of predicted fairly in that range. It was about that $13 to $15 million range. I'm happy that the Saints kind of pay this money. This means that they have less money to spend in free agency. They didn't have much to begin with. But I don't think this is a necessarily huge needle mover for them. And that just means that they have less money to spend elsewhere.
Yeah, Chase Young's kind of riding off that draft status, second overall pick. Granted, he was very good in college, highly billed coming into the draft, but injuries kind of derailed him after a good rookie season, and he just hasn't been very good, to be quite frank, since then. I'm glad we didn't pay him this amount of money. I was thinking like, okay, I'd be good signing him to 7.5, 8 million for 1 year, but the Saints gave him 13 million guaranteed, so I'm good on that. And to kind of transition, it is draft season, and like you said last week, we're going to be moving into the defensive side of the ball now, and we work from the back to the front. So probably the least entertaining or appealing out of all the defensive positions is the safety because they play the furthest back. You probably don't see them on your screen a ton, but they have important roles. They can't let anything behind them and stuff like that. They come down into the box, they make tackles, and these safeties this year don't do that a ton. I'm not a big fan of a lot of these guys, but one of them stands above the rest, and that's Tyler Nubin from Minnesota. I think he can do it all. Really, can play in the box and is pretty rangy himself. Really good vision, good ball skills, and I think he's the only pure safety that has a chance of hearing his name called within the top 50 picks.
I think you're absolutely right. This is the only guy in the consensus board that I believe that's in the top 50 at 36. When you look at just kind of the overall consensus in terms of coverage over his career at Minnesota, he allowed a passer rating of 37.6, which is really, really good. And then he also comes out of the same school that Antonio Winfield does. And what's cool is I think Antonio Winfield just got paid by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So obviously a good safety school, followed in Winfield's steps. I think, like you said, he's the best safety in this class. Very rangy, has good ball skills. What I noticed is when I watch some of like more like the highlight plays that everybody kind of gets drawn to, is that he's reading the quarterback's eyes and trying the jump routes. And I wonder against more savvy quarterbacks who can kind of hold him with their eyes if he's going to be a little bit more not lackadaisical in coverage, but not recognize that there's a route behind him. And that may take some learning to do, but I think he's a great safety. I think the only guy that you could really put above him in this is jumping the gun, but it's Cooper Dijon out of Iowa, who could play nickel, who could play outside corner, who could play safety. That's the only prospect that's really on his level from that position.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I wrote down for kind of the negatives on Newman that he's not the most physical tackler, that he lacks top end strength. So I think he needs to clean up kind of the hip check tackles and stuff like that, especially if you're going to be alone on the back end playing free safety, which is where he thrived in college. Then the next group I had were the two Miami safeties and Cam Kitchens and James Williams, both really good athletes. I think they could both be rotation guys to start their like day one rotation guys. Both are like very lineup versatile, but I think it's James Williams is like I think he's going to be more of a linebacker because he has like freak linebacker size, kind of like if you remember Isaiah Simmons, who
Yep.
out of Clemson, he was like safety linebacker, corner, quarterback, head coach, whatever. I think he's going to be more of that kind of guy, like a Jeremy Chin, a safety who comes down and really thrives as a linebacker. That's James Williams. The other guy, Cam Kitchens, I think is a bit rangier, but I think sometimes he can get too far out of the play. Uh, as in like he's too far back and he's not asked to cover as much one on one. He's just like a cleanup guy. So that's something he would have to improve upon when he gets to the league. But both of those guys, I think, would be like top 75 guys, go in like round three, something like that.
So, according to consensus, Kayvon Kinchins is consensus number three. And what's interesting is you look at his combine, he tested very poorly. His relative athletic score, his RAS, is very low. But when you turn on the tape, this guy's flying all over the field. I can't tell you
Hmm.
how many plays I saw him go from one hash, and in college, this is a big deal, to the other side of the field to make a play, whether it be an interception, whether it be a tackle. This guy just has a nose for the ball, and it doesn't show up in your classic standard testing. So if this guy falls, and a team picks him up, I think they're getting a steal. I think this is a really solid player. Now, James William, he's consensus number 10 safety. So it's interesting that you have him as high as you do. Both are listed as free safeties, but I think he is more that strong safety. He's more the enforcer in the box. And when teams are going in these nickel and dime packages, you need to have either more cornerbacks or more safeties that can go into these packages. And I think he can fill that role where you don't have to be worried about being a nickel going against like 12 personnel because James Williams offers another guy in the run game. And so that kind of offsets the linebacker off the field. And then he's still okay in coverage. I wouldn't say he's the best guy in coverage, but he's pretty solid. Now, the next guy you have on your board, and I want to be very specific, your board, Akeem Dent out of FSU, he's consensus 34 safety. I'm curious why you have him as safety 3 in this class.
Well, I think he's 4. I think he's safety 4.
Oh, yes, James William
And
was 3. Yeah, you're right.
he
Yeah.
talked about I also had James Williams higher. I like hitters. I like safeties that come down, fit the run, and just blast people when they tackle them because I think out of all the positions on defense that can create like an explosive play for the defense, so to speak, like a tackle for loss that's unexpected or force a fumble like that. I think the safety is the one that's most likely because they're kind of the wild card when it comes to the defense. So when you get to the line, you see the defensive front, you see where the linebackers are, you see if the corners are man or zone with motion and stuff like that. But the safeties really have kind of free reign, so to speak. I'm trying to think of the word. Like it's their prerogative to move around and deceive. And I think that James Williams and Akeem Dent are both really good at that. And when they come down and make the hits, they just bring the heat. They lay people out. And one of the things I wrote with Akeem Dent is that he has good value as a blitzer. And that's something I look for as well with safeties is versatility. Obviously, a lot of people can drop back and be rangy. You talked about Cam Kinchens. His last name is hard to pronounce, but he's super rangy because he stays on the back end and he can cover a lot of plays like that. But guys like James Williams and Dent can come down and make plays before the QB can get the ball off or before the throw can happen, before the running back can break outside. And that's something that I like about those kind of players. I like versatile players who can make a difference closer to the line of scrimmage rather than farther behind it. One of the
I
reasons why, just real quick, one of the reasons Brian Branch, I think, was regarded so highly last year was if you look at his tackles for loss number, he was number one out of all DBs in the draft last year, coming out of Alabama. And if you watch I believe it was the Sugar Bowl against Kansas State, he was in the backfield maybe every third play against the K State offense, and that was with Deuce Vaughn. Like that was a pretty good K State offense, just getting tackle for loss after tackle for loss. And I think while these guys aren't as good as Brian Branch, who probably could have been a first rounder, I think they have some of that game to them. And that's why I value them so high because you can have a ton of people be rangy back end safeties, but I don't think a lot of people can do like come down and hit people like that and be effective in the backfield like these guys can.
And I think that was the head on the nail. The way you evaluate safeties, what you're looking for in a safety is different than other evaluators when they're looking at the safety position. And Akeem Dent, he's a great box safety. He is a phenomenal open field tackler. That was the one thing that kind of jumped off when I was watching different plays from him was his ability to stop the running back in the run game on different outside kind of run looks, or just make open field tackles with a receiver catching the ball, and that's good to see. That's what you want, because you hear so many times that like the fundamentals of just tackling has kind of just like left the game. Like there's so many people that try to do those hip just checks, like you were mentioning with Tyler Nubin, who is the number one safety in this class. And so I have a guy that you know that if they're going to make contact with the ball carrier, that they're going to bring that guy down, and that's a huge trait to have. And I think that I'm not saying that advocates putting them above like a Javon Pollard or a Colleen Bullock or a Jaden Hicks or a Cole Bishop. But it is one of those things to consider when you're having to go into these lighter personnel packages. Are these guys able to make the tackle? Because when you have bigger tight ends, when you have bigger blockers in the run game, are they going to be able to fit that run? Are they going to be able to make that tackle? And so at number 5, you have another strong safety. So theme with your kind of top 5. Sion Vaki out of Utah.
Yeah.
He's the consensus number 12 safety in this class. And just kind of put it in perspective, the last 3 guys that we've talked about have been over like 100 in the consensus board. So when we talk about this being a thin safety class, this is a thin safety class. I think he's kind of Shaq Thompson esque. Came out of Washington. Shaq Thompson did. He played kind of like that safety linebacker hybrid role, and then he was running the ball as a ball carrier. Vaki kind of did the same thing at Utah, which was pretty cool. And again, another box safety. So this is a guy that could kind of be that versatile, like safety linebacker hybrid, and a guy that could be on the line, like you said, and make plays.
Yeah, we talk about Travis Hunter this college football season as being the true two-way player, and granted, he's amazing. He should be a top 10 pick in next year's draft. Sione Vaki was also a very good two-way player. So much so that people at the combine requested him to do running back drills as well. This is a guy that, if you look at the USC tape, Southern Cal, and that's what I highlighted as my favorite tape. He was good on the back end and as a ball carrier. I think he scored in that game as a ball carrier. Uh, Another box safety, like you said, the only real true free safety in this class is Newbin that I think is worth taking early. But another box safety, I think he's shifty on like we talk about running backs and receivers being shifty. You can see the traits translate to when he's on defense, like the way he's able to avoid blockers to get to the tackle, or the way he's able to make a cut and get to the ball carrier faster than you would anticipate, stuff like that. Good angles of pursuit. You can see those kind of traits carry over. And to me, like kind of the while it's not a like different sports players, like obviously you want players to play multiple sports, like you want your receivers to run track, you want your QBs to play foot or excuse me baseball, receivers play basketball, stuff like that. Him playing two different positions, which offense and defense is kind of not separate games, but they're pretty different. And to be able to be good at both of those, I think is going to only help him in his NFL career. And even if you just watch him for the safety tape, I think he's a pretty rangy and physical tackler who is always making the tackles. And the last thing I wrote, and this is something that I look for with safeties, linebackers, people who show up in run support. He's always in the final frame. That's something I value a lot because that always means they're giving effort and they're always going to the ball. And that's something I want to see out of my safeties, linebackers, even corners contributing to the run game. So another reason why Sione Vaki is top five for me.
I have a question for you. There's another safety from a consensus standpoint out of Utah that is actually ranked a little bit higher than him, and it's Cole Bishop. His RAWs, relative athletic score, is 9.81, so really, really high, tested really well in that department. He was the free safety at Utah, good against tight ends and coverage. And I think
Mhm.
part of the reason why he was good is he covered Dalton Kincaid in practices at Utah. And look at what Kincaid's doing. So I think there's an element of like sometimes when you practice against the best, you improve against that. And when we talk about offenses trying to lean more in the 12 and 13 personnel and how that benefits them and kind of just like numbers game, having a guy like a Cole Bishop on the field, I think is huge. What is your thoughts on him and why do you have Aki above him?
Well, I just like Vacu's versatility. First of all, I'm a big like on the back end versatility to me is king. So that's one of the reasons I have them higher. The thing about Cole Bishop, I like him. He's a good tackler. He's good in coverage against like bigger, kind of slower receivers and stuff like that. I kind of wrote down that he gets manipulated and he seems to be a step behind a lot of the time, especially when he's playing from the star position, which is like the safety nickel corner, basically. He seems to be like a step behind or something because I think he can get caught looking in the backfield when he has coverage assignments, which to me is it's obviously a bad thing, right? But I think it can put you a step behind, a half second behind, and a half second in the NFL is the difference between a tackle and a touchdown. And
It
that
is.
kind of thing to me is just one of the reasons I had him lower. I still like him as being a like a probably an earlier day three guy who can be a rotation guy early in his career. It's just I like Vaki's versatility and athleticism a lot better.
And that's very valid. You heard it from the draft analyst himself. Again, just to highlight just how weak this safety class is. Only 7 safeties are in the top 100. And we saw so many safeties get cut, get released this offseason, guys that are available still, even after the first wave of free agency, when we've seen guys like Jordan Fuller and Cameron Curl come off the board. There's still Justin Simmons out there, Eddie Jackson, Quandre Diggs, Micah Hyde, Marcus May, and those are big names. Like those are household recognizable names for the most part. They're all over the age of 31 at this rate. And then some of the other guys like Jamal Adams, Tracy Walker, when we're talking about like the best of the rest, like those are 7 guys, and those last 2 guys, and Adams and Walker, are 29 years old. So these are older safeties. They'll probably get kind of like the Clowney treatment where it's that second, third wave of free agency they get signed. why, like, we saw with the running back market, we saw that the running back class was really really weak, and we saw the running back market explode. We have not seen that with safeties, and I'm shocked, especially with more nickel and dime usage. Like, can you kind of justify what's going on in the NFL? I'm shocked some of these guys are still free agents. I would have expected a lot more 1 year deals, 2 year deals handed out for some of these players when it seems to be a scarce position in terms of just like resources available.
Yeah, I think the league is signaling that they want to get younger on the back end at safety, right? Because if you look at the guys that were signed, uh, obviously Jordan Fuller for us, a younger safety. I think he's 24, 25. He's at the end of his rookie deal, so younger there. Jeremy Chen got signed pretty quickly, again at the end of his rookie deal. Cameron Curl at the end of his rookie deal. Even Von Bell, who we released, who wasn't at the end of his rookie deal, but I still think he was 27, got
Yep.
signed before guys like Justin Simmons, who for the last 5 years has been the best safety in the NFL.
One of the best,
He's
yeah.
one of the best, if not the best, still unsigned. Eddie Jackson, he's had some injury history, but still productive when he's on the field, unsigned. Quandre Diggs is pretty good. Like all these guys, I think they're just older, and I think even with a weaker safety class like this, I think teams are like more willing to spend on younger guys that are probably more maybe one step ahead of the older guys in terms of speed or recognition. I guess that's my only way to rationalize it because like you talk about, there are some positions where the value just isn't there, and safety is one of them, but running back is one of them too, as has been the discourse over the past probably half decade or so. Right, running backs don't matter has been the thing, but running backs got paid this year, and even guys that are after their rookie deals or got a rookie deal and then were tagged at the end. So technically their third deal, I guess now they're getting paid. So it just has to be to me that these guys are just getting up there in age, and I do expect some of these guys to, like you said, pull a Clowney. Maybe wait till after the I think it's like May 11th or 12th or something, whatever the deadline is, to where signings after that date don't count in the compensatory pick formula. Maybe teams are waiting for that to be able to sign these guys because I still think guys like Justin Simmons and Quandre Diggs can still contribute, especially for a contender, right? Like if you're looking at a team, if you're a team that's like in a deep playoff run every year, like the Lions or something, who have pun intended put a lion's share worth of resources into the secondary over the past couple years, and they just lose Chauncey Gardner Johnson. I think that's a team that could sign like Justin Simmons or Quandre Diggs pretty easily, but they're holding pat. I think it might be to play into that compensatory pick formula or something like, or maybe a post June 1 signing to where I don't know if that impacts what they make and or how it's distributed on their cap sheets this year, but maybe that might be the reason. I don't know, but it is kind of bizarre to see some of these names still on the board.
Yeah, like you said, it's bizarre, it's weird. Like you said, maybe we see more of it in the second wave. I don't think these guys are not going to be on a roster this coming fall. It's just weird that we saw interior offensive line, we saw running back, we saw a run on these when their draft classes probably aren't the best that we've seen in recent years. And that just isn't the case with the safety market. So you heard kind of our overview of the top five prospects coming into this draft class based on what Jacob saw on the field. We're going to post our visual like we do every week and kind of breaking down how many tackles, how many turnovers. I think it's how many, like either sacks. That's what it was, sacks instead of tackles for losses. So you guys will be able to kind of see out of the five guys that we chose where they rank in those metrics as well. And we're kind of wrapped up for this episode, a little over the hour mark. We've hit kind of, I think the hour mark we hit last week because of free agency. And then the week before, maybe?
We did
No,
not
it
hit
was
it.
tight
We did
ends.
not hit it during the
Yes,
tight ends for
we
sure.
did. Yeah, I was like, Dylan came on for the wide receivers, not the tight
Yeah.
ends. So with that, we are in perfect takes. We are, like I said, a little bit over that hour mark. I thought we were going to go under with this, but we had a lot to talk about with Aaron Donald's retirement, different stuff going on around the NFL, and this draft cycle. And this is going to be more Panthers related, but out of the safeties that were mentioned, including the ones I listed off, the Javon Bullard, Kalen Bullock, Jaden Hicks, and Cole Bishops. Even those guys that we didn't really even touch on to a higher extent. I don't think we draft any of those guys as the Carolina Panthers. That is my take. If we get a guy, it's going to be day 3, a guy that's probably like not on a lot of people's radars. Obviously, the gurus will probably know the dude, know a little bit about him. But that's my take for this week. I know yours is safety related as well. It's a little bit more general, but take the floor.
Yeah, I like that one. I think we sufficiently addressed it with Jordan Fuller being familiar with Jiro Evero's scheme, so I don't think we draft one there. And they drafted guy out of FS, Jamie Robinson last year, so I
Yep.
think they're set on safety depth. My take is, and I talked about this a little bit before, I don't think we're going to see a single safety in round one this year. I think that trend's going to continue. Last time we saw one was Kyle Hamilton, who to me was the best player out of everybody in that draft class. That was the 22 draft class. He went 14th, I believe, overall to the Ravens. But yeah, I don't think we're going to see a safety in round one this year unless, and you talked about it earlier, unless we see Cooper DeJean out of Iowa once he's drafted transition to safety in the league. I know a lot of people think he's rangy enough to play safety in the league. I liked him at corner. I think he's still a first round, maybe second round corner. But maybe a team like the Bills, who has lost a ton on the back end, may want to invest in a younger safety because they end up losing Jordan Poyer, who goes to Miami, and Micah Hyde, who both have been Pro Bowlers over the past couple years. So maybe we see Cooper DeJean transition to safety in the league, but other than that, no safeties in round one pretty easily.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good take. I heard from the Athletic this morning when I was doing some work, Nate Tice say that if Cooper Dijon made it to the Ravens, which would be past the Buffalo Bills, and to pair him with Kyle Hamilton would be
Ooh.
absolutely disgusting just because of both of those players' versatility. They could line up in certain positions pre snap and then post snap be in completely other positions. And that would be insane. So, that would be a dream scenario, in my opinion. They obviously have a lot of issues on their offensive line with Kevin Zeitler leaving for Detroit, trading Morgan Moses to the Jets. And so, with all of those kind of situations, they're probably going to go offensive line more than anything. But I think that pairing would be absolutely amazing. And like you said, that is a guy that could rotate into safety at the next level. We'll kind of have to see. He's that talented of a prospect to kind of be able to transition from corner to slot to safety. But if you guys have any questions for us, hit us up at Purrfect_Takes. You can also hit up myself at Pat Analytics or Jacob at Jacob. I think it's underscore LaQuire with Jacob and LaQuire capitalized. And so, yeah, we'd be happy to answer those questions next week. Like Jacob was saying, we get closer to the line of scrimmage. So we'll be talking about corners. And believe it or not, it is a deep draft class for corners. So that will be an episode that I think you guys should tune in for. Catch us next Tuesday. You can find us on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. And we're still working out the kinks. I know I've been saying this for close to a year now, but hopefully we'll have some video for you guys here coming up closer to the draft season. Be able to give you some more draft highlight breakdowns of some of these players that we're high on. Obviously, do some more mocks for not only the first round, but the Panthers, since we are a Panthers themed podcast. But yeah, catch us next week. For this week, we are done. So we'll catch you then.